Velasco por Rec.
Madre, mi padre.
Lo compartiré un premio con Elena.
What's that? What? Jeez!
Oh my god!
Oh, you blocked me.
¡Casa, vamos, chiquillos!
Where did it all go wrong for the Rec franchise? Found footage is kind of a Marmite genre. Some people think it heightens realism and immerses you in a story, while others believe it's gimmicky and prevents them from being fully invested in what's happening. I'm firmly in the category of indifference. I really don't care what filmmaking style a movie takes, so long as it's done effectively. For found footage movies, you have to stretch your believability. You have to believe that the footage was organically put together. And found. Take Chronicle, which is stitched together from dozens of camera sources, all perfectly framed and edited. But then again, a camera isn't supposed to exist in movies at all, so there's already a barrier to believability right there. We just tune it out. The main difference is found footage movies don't act like the cameras shooting the action don't exist, and everything caught on screen was really filmed. Films like Blair Witch set in stone the modern formula of filmmakers becoming involved in something sinister and keeping the camera rolling for various reasons. Rec follows a similar premise. It tells the tale of a reporter and her lone cameraman as they do a segment following the day-to-day goings-on in a firehouse, only for the firemen to be called out on an emergency. They tag along and inadvertently get caught in a situation where they are quarantined in an apartment building where an infection has turned the residents into bloodthirsty maniacs. It's not the most original setup, but the way it's presented is what makes this movie so unique. If there's one thing this film has over others, it's this: intensity.
¡Vale, Sams! ¡No! ¡Esta!
The movie goes down the 28 Days Later in Dawn of the Dead remake style of zombies, and really takes advantage of the found footage concept to truly show the chaos of being in an enclosed space with rampaging infected coming down on you. There isn't any music in the film either, just the diegetic sounds of screeches, screams and arguing. It's a fascinatingly realistic film, and purposefully looks messy to really make you believe this is a camera being whipped about in a frenzy, while still making sure you can just see what's going on. However, this scene where the movie rewinds itself to play a woman being killed again feels really out of place. It's the one moment of the movie I really dislike.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
When the number of people starts dwindling in turn themselves is where its reputation as such a horrifying experience fully shines. There's jump scares, but they're not obnoxious. They're genuinely frightening, and the film takes its time to build up to some of its best scares in between being rushed down by the infected. And it makes sense why they would keep the camera rolling too. Angela's a reporter. She reports on the events, interviews people, grabs behind the scenes exclusive footage and stops to explain the situation to the camera. It also utilises the camera well too, with scenes involving its light, using it to scope out areas that might be threatening, and the entire climax being shot in night vision.
Mi marido está afuera y dice que está lleno de policías, que está cortada la calle y que no le dejan acercarse al edificio. Y le traía antibióticos a la niña.
However, the film isn't just this big roller coaster. It's exceptionally well paced to keep your interest with big moments, while having more downtime to soak in the situation than you might think. The film is only an hour and 10 minutes, and it feels perfect at that length. Not too short that you feel cheated, and not overstaying its welcome. There's only so much screaming and violence your brain can take in one sitting after all.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
The characters are good, with our lead Angela being very charming and likeable, but also not beyond being rude and overbearing to the other characters. You get to know quite a few of the residents in this little apartment building and the police firemen there to help, and they're all performed wonderfully. They have unique quirks and make us want to see them survive. The movie actually has a few moments of comedy here and there. All the zombies in the film you see are people who we've met across its runtime, making it all the more tragic when someone you like suddenly shows up bloody and frothing at the mouth. It also has a subtly deep storyline if you're someone who pays close attention, and the last third of the film takes a crazy detour into one of the most suspenseful and scary endings I've seen in a cinema. Trust me, people may sniff their nose and say it wasn't scary, but when you were in a darkened theatre with the speakers blasting, you could hear a pin drop. It's that suspenseful, with some haunting imagery. I understand there's an American remake with a sequel titled Quarantine, but I'm not going to talk about them in this video. We'll save them for another day.
Consider yourself lucky.
REC was a breath of fresh air in a genre mostly defined by slow-paced chillers, delivering an intimate, fast-paced, and frightening experience. I highly recommend it. When I heard REC 2 was coming out, I was really curious where they would go with the series. There was certainly room to explore the subtle storytelling from the first entry further, but I was skeptical whether it could remain as fresh. They take an Aliens approach to the whole thing, upping the stakes and the mayhem with a group more equipped to deal with the situation. Here we follow a GEO team on a mission into the apartment building from the first film only a short time after the events that erupted begun. It also makes sense that they would have these helmet-mounted cameras. After all, this is what the real police, soldiers and the like will do in order to document and learn from a particular mission. Everyone's performances are great here. They don't get much to work with, but what they have, they sell the hell out of. We have the main team of GEO, a priest and a bunch of kids. They're serviceable, but there's so many. And it makes you miss the little character moments from the first movie that injected a lot of personality into the proceedings.
¿Qué pasa, Martos?
The film doesn't mess about. It gives us the setup, and within 5 minutes we're in the trenches, back in the thick of the apartment complex that has already fallen into the chaotic infected zone that we understand from the first film. It's not long before our team are forced to do combat with the infected.
That's disturbing.
The movie expands our knowledge of the infection. Even though it really is a true-to-life virus, its origins are supernatural and based heavily on religious beliefs. We learn someone who is infected can actually be pushed away using religious iconography and speaking the word of God. It's a great take on the usual zombie formula of it just being a vague, unexplained outbreak. We learned previously in the first film that it's based on experimentation into demonic possession. This film simply confirms it to be the case and lets us in on the whole story and the way this hive mind operation works with the main demon puppeteering its many hosts.
¡Rosso! ¿Qué ha pasado? ¿Dónde está? No lo sé, joder. Estaba ahí, estaba ahí. ¡Apague, apague! ¡Rosso, ¿dónde? ¿Dónde está?
With the curtain now pulled completely back on the supernatural side of things, the film is free to give us more creepy, otherworldly visuals. Now, the infected scuttle across ceilings, frightening, unexplainable events occur, and the infected talk back to the characters they're hunting.
developed symptoms similar to those displayed by their attackers.
It's much less 28 Days Later this time round, and much more The Exorcist. Though it never loses that sense of realism it's going for. Sure, the camera does get angled a little too perfectly a lot of the time, and it has way too many parts where a zombie will just grab the camera and scream at you while shaking, but its tone is perfectly matched to the first entries. For the most part. While the first film took moments to breathe and soak us in the unfolding narrative, the sequel doesn't spare as much time for this. It's a fighter jet of a film, rocketing through the plot with only a basic goal in mind. It's purely focused on having you thrilled, with intense attacks on our heroes round every corner, and only minor moments of levity where they can inform us of some plot before diving headfirst into the next nightmarish sequence. The film is only 80 minutes long, and it felt even shorter than that. It just propels you through a roller coaster of events so quickly. The downside is that the characters don't get a chance to make much of an impact. Aside from Father Owen and a returning character from the original I won't spoil, the rest are pretty much just there to be targets for the infected to take out. There are other drawbacks too. The film is very poor at utilising fast motion. Instead of intense cuts or careful planning, it simply speeds up the footage to indicate the attacks are more intense than they are, but it does a weak job at masking this technique. It just looks like sped up footage, with audio that doesn't match well enough to hide the illusion. While the film is intense, I really do miss the extremely well done build-ups from the first entry. Not once was I scared in the sequel, or really that nervous. It's more fun than it is a serious threat to your fear levels. There's no rise of suspense leading to a sudden burst of violence, it's all jump scares and screaming. Think Dead Space as opposed to Resident Evil. However, it's so well matched to the first film, you could combine them into one barely 2-hour movie and it would work extremely well. It just so naturally follows on from that story. Does it reinvent the series for the better or bring a ton of fresh ideas? No. But at least it explores the material further and expands what came before it. Rec 2 is just a blast for zombie fans wanting a really fast-paced experience. From the first 5 minutes to the last, it goes hard, and in my opinion, it's a satisfying follow-up to the first entry. The climax of Rec 2 once more ended on a cliffhanger, implying the infection was going to be released from the apartment complex and begin spreading to the outer world. This had a lot of promise for the franchise to go bigger than ever. The first 2 films were directed by a duo, but now the 2 directors decided to split up the next 2 sequels between them, with Paco Plaza solely directing the 3rd entry and Juan Balaguero going on to direct the 4th and final entry. Unfortunately, Rec 3 is an absolutely baffling entry into this franchise.
What? What the fuck?
¡Coño! ¿A qué esperáis? ¡Para adentro!
¡Corre, abuela, corre, cierra!
¡Cállate, figurín, que aquí no entra! ¡Apóstatas! ¡Hijos de puta!
This one follows a wedding between Clara and Coldo. During the reception, wouldn't you know it, there's an outbreak of the infection and all hell breaks loose, leading to them getting separated and trying to fight their way back to one another. The previous films were brutal and hot-blooded nightmares with people trapped in small, contained spaces. It was frighteningly plausible, with a focus on gritty realism from a first-person perspective. And so here, the third film develops on that by making it a goofy comedy horror that's no longer found footage.
What? What?
Yeah, while the film starts off as another found footage entry, 20 minutes in, it quite jarringly decides it's going to be a fully cinematic experience. This could have had some potential, I guess, but all it achieves here is losing the franchise's unique identity. Those first 20 minutes are not executed well either, as it appears to be cut together from multiple camera angles, ruining illusion. The acting comes across as awkward and wooden, the sound seems off, and it lacks a lot of the frenetic energy that the franchise had before. The series was so successful because it felt like such a breath of fresh air to the genre, and now it suddenly abandons those roots for something it's poorly translated to. It has a lower budget than the previous film, and through found footage, you can really stretch a budget, since you can cut out a lot of work that a standard set would need. If you're not as experienced in classical filmmaking and your budget has been cut, I can't imagine why you would do this change outside of selfish reasons. It's not even well filmed either. It's shot like a bargain bin B movie with very low production values and some truly terrible editing. It has the feel of a hurried first draft. There's so many sloppy editing errors and almost no attempts to induce suspense. If I was being generous, I would say it's more of a splatter flick, but it isn't. There is a surprising lack of blood in Wreck-Free. Even during points where it seems like blood should be flying like foam at a Jonas Brothers concert in 2009, it doesn't. It has hints of gore, but it never shows it off, almost like it's censoring itself. You usually expect the BBFC or the MPAA to neuter a movie, but this one does its job for them. This could work if it was executed with suspense and tension to pierce your eyes with a gory visual while keeping it grounded, but the whole vibe of the experience screams it's meant to be a fun splatterfest, so you're just left there with gorehound blue balls.
These blue balls are about to explode.
I don't want to die!
The sound mixing is also incredibly cheap, it really sours the experience. It's just stock squelching and animal sounds. The first two entries' sound production was one of their best assets. It really created a dread-filled atmosphere with the rumblings and screeches elsewhere in the apartment complex. And the violence had a satisfying punch to it. Well here, let me just play you some comparisons.
Pon en mi debilidad para que resida en mí el poder de Cristo. En los oprobios, en las privaciones, en las persecuciones y en las angustias soportadas por amor a Cristo. Porque cuando soy débil... Ya no funcionan. Dime dónde estás. No temeré los terrores de la noche. Ni la flecha que vuela del día. Ni la peste que...
How do you fuck that up? How do you fuck that up?
This extends to the story too. There's nothing special to be found and no new developments to further the lore or universe of the franchise. Not once could I get invested with what was on screen since there was so little to go on. We barely get to know anyone in the film, and the moment they really get any screen time, they're zombie chow. Remember the naturally occurring but creepy imagery in the first film? The camera looking down and seeing all the infected rushing up screaming? There's none of that here. It's just bog standard horror filmmaking with no style or passion. If they were going to go the cinematic route, they could have at least made it look grounded and gritty like the first two, but here it's all so clean and crisp. Wreck was chilling because of how believable it felt and the time it took to ensure we cared about the characters. Well, here's a guy dressed as a giant sponge and people decked out in knight armour. That is all I know about their characters. It also seems to keep trying to be funny with gags, but I never laughed at anything. It just comes off as awkward. As I mentioned before, it can't even go over the top with its gore-splattering premise. The special effects look too fake, and it holds itself back whenever it may have a chance to be fun. For instance, there's a scene where the bride gets a chainsaw. It's even in all the marketing. The big moment that they hype up and build through the promotion for the film. And I thought, oh yeah, here we go, she's gonna go ham on a ton of infected, brain-dead lawnmower style. But no. She kills two in a surprisingly bloodless 30-second exchange and then runs away. Really? This is the type of movie I wish I was involved in the production process so that I could see how all these dreadful decisions were actually made. I don't think I've seen a sequel so poorly mishandled before. I cannot think of a single thing it does well to further the franchise. It doesn't tie into the first two entries, we learn nothing new about the infection or experiments, no characters return, and it shockingly feels smaller despite being set in a wedding across a big manor. Choosing to go for comedy over horror also alienates what fans loved about the first entries too. Wreck Free is a fucking bewildering mishandling of the franchise. It lacks any of the visceral feels of the previous two entries, reinvents itself for the worst, and has nothing of any substance to it. It's a Wreck movie in name only. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone outside of those desperately curious to see how far removed it really is from the first two entries. After Wreck 3 was a disaster, Wreck 4 seems to play out as an apology of some sorts. Not only is this entry set immediately following the events of Wreck 2, but it also brought back Angela again as the main focus, and that got me at least a little hopeful upon release that it would rewrite the wrongs of Genesis. Disappointingly, the film is fully cinematic, but at least there's more effort put into the filmmaking this time. The visuals are a bit darker and gloomier, the camera work actually gets a little creative in some scenes, but on the whole, it's still a cheap looking effort. The opening shows promise as we're treated to a much more suited style and approach for the series, and it is cool to see the apartment complex in this way and encounter characters from the first film again. It's got a good spooky atmosphere, shadowy look, and there's a hard-hitting shootout. So far so good. There they find the possessed Angela, and her along with some other survivors set sail on a boat out to sea. And I'm just gonna say it, fuck this boat.
Ya estamos otra vez.
It's just a painfully boring setting for the finale of the series to take place. And we're stuck on it for the duration. After the opening, the infection doesn't even come back into play until halfway through the movie, and there's precious little that's interesting to hold our attention till then. Remember in the King Kong remake how it takes an hour to reach Skull Island? That's how the first half of this movie feels. And all the creeping dread from the opening is gone. It's back to the poor filmmaking and economical feel of the third entry, only slightly improved. It's subtitled Apocalypse, but there's nothing remotely apocalyptic feeling about it either. Even the director admitted the film would not have an apocalyptic style presumed by its title, stating, all the movies in the Wreck series have the same budget, so you're not really going to have big scenes of Barcelona full of zombies. If it's not going to be apocalyptic, then why subtitle it that? Just be honest and call it Wreck Dark Waters or something.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
So by now, Angela is possessed after having the demonic parasite passed into her from Tristana Medeiros, who was patient zero for the outbreak, and effectively she's the villain of the piece, but only we, the audience, are aware of this. You might think it would be a suspenseful affair with Angela having to hide her true identity while taking over the ship with her infected drones, but no, she's barely a factor in the movie. She mostly just stands around and blends in, adding nothing and playing her role completely straight. I will admit, there's a reason for this explained in the plot, but it's, for lack of a better word, just kinda lame, and really lessens the joyful relevance of the second film's big reveal. It's a twist in the tale that, in my opinion, really should have been left out. Instead, we get a bunch of other bland villains they need to go up against, and they're so agonizingly boring that you'll forget their names by the time the credits are done. I don't even have much to say about this entry, it's just that unimpactful. I mean, fuck, at least Wreck 3 was interestingly bad with its strange direction choices. This is just nothing. A completely unflavoured yogurt of an experience. The only new thing we really get to learn is the infection can spread to monkeys. Who knew primates were so religious? Other than that, it's just a run-of-the-mill zombie flick set on a boat. Never was I left in suspense or intrigued by the plot, it was just so predictable and dull. The previous entries had the cool religious angle that gave it a unique edge, as well as commentary on Catholicism's decline in Spain. And this one drops near enough all mentions of demons and treats the infection as a purely scientific drab lab experiment. This franchise originally tapped into the ethics of journalism during times of crisis, government cover-ups, and was a startlingly realistic depiction of panic and contagion, drawing on fears of isolation and feeling helpless. Wreck 4 has a boat. Honestly, if it wasn't for the fact I knew this was the last one and it has Angela in it, I doubt I ever would have bothered seeing it. This woman was at the wedding in Wreck 3. She dies without doing anything important. Okay, that was a reason for Wreck 3 existing, I guess. Wreck 4 is a step up from the previous entry, but not by much. It's just a by-the-numbers mundane horror flick. In the end, I simply find it a sad way to end a quadrilogy that started out on such an acclaimed note, and with its release, ends one of the most perplexing declines of a franchise in horror history. This is a series that started out with such passion, identity, energy, and over time was betrayed by its own creators and drained of all those qualities, beating it down into a husk of its former self and fading into the background with the hundreds of other middling horror franchises seeking a point to exist.
I've been reading that in this one you decided I'm not going to shoot handheld found footage style, I'm going to set the camera up and shoot it in a more traditional style. What led you to make that decision?
Well, because I think we did it in the first one, and we keep doing it in the second one, and it's done. I think we explore that the landscape, narrative landscape, and it's done. And then we decided to make a different thing and to design a different movie.